The Ballroom's Second Chance. Chapter 1. The Echo of a Waltz. The ballroom of Ashworth House glittered with 1,000 candles. Their flames danced in crystal chandeliers, casting fractured light across the silk gowns and polished boots of London's finest. It was the event of the season, a masquerade hosted by the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth, and every eligible lord and lady had descended upon it like moths to a flame. Lady Margaret Ellis stood at the edge of the marble floor, her ivory domino mask secured with a trembling hand. Beneath the mask, her face was pale, her grey eyes sharp with a vigilance she had cultivated over 4 bitter years. She had not wanted to come. Her younger sister, Cecilia, had begged her, insisting that hiding in the country would not mend a broken heart. But Margaret's heart was no longer broken. It had been broken, then shattered, then swept into a dustbin and set aflame. What remained was a cold, hard thing, a pearl of resentment polished smooth by time. "You are brooding," Cecilia said, appearing at her elbow in a cloud of rose perfume. At 18, Cecilia was all eager hope and unblemished dreams. She wore a pale blue gown and a silver mask shaped like a crescent moon. "Mamma said you would brood. She said to remind you that Lord Pemberton has asked after you twice." "Lord Pemberton collects snuff boxes and repeats himself," Margaret replied flatly. "I would rather brooder." Cecilia sighed. "Margaret, it has been 4 years. You cannot avoid society forever simply because one man proved faithless." The word struck Margaret like a slap. Faithless. She turned her gaze toward the swirling dancers, her jaw tightening. "I do not avoid society. I am merely selective." "You are a widow's daughter with a modest dowry and a sharp tongue. You cannot afford to be selective," Cecilia said, not unkindly. She squeezed Margaret's gloved hand. "Just one dance, for me." Before Margaret could refuse, a figure emerged from the crowd. A tall man in a black velvet domino and a silver half-mask that concealed the upper half of his face. He moved with a familiar, easy grace that made Margaret's blood run cold. She did not recognize his mask. She did not recognize the cut of his coat or the gold pin at his cravat. But she recognized the way he stood, weight balanced on his left foot, head tilted slightly, as if listening to music only he could hear. No. It could not be. He was in Yorkshire. He had married an heiress, or so the gossip columns had claimed. He had forgotten her. She had forgotten him, or rather she had practiced forgetting him until the act became second nature. "Lady Margaret," the man said, and her name on his lips was a ghost returned from the grave. His voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened at the edges, but unmistakable. "Lord Jonathan Pierce." She did not curtsy. She did not speak. She simply stared at the space where his mouth should be beneath the mask, a firm mouth that had once promised her the moon and then withdrawn the offer before breakfast. "May I have this dance?" he asked. The musicians were tuning their instruments for a waltz, the dance of intimacy, of close quarters and whispered words. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. "You may not," she said. Behind her, Cecilia gasped softly, but Margaret did not care. She turned on her heel and walked away, not quickly. She would not give him the satisfaction of flight, but with the measured, deliberate pace of a woman who had learned to walk away from ruin and never look back. She did not look back, but she felt his gaze on her shoulders all the way to the terrace doors. The terrace was empty, thank God. The night air was cool and smelled of damp earth and late-blooming jasmine. Margaret gripped the stone balustrade and breathed deeply, willing her pulse to slow. 4 years. She had built a fortress of indifference, brick by painstaking brick. And in one moment, one word, dance, Jonathan Pierce had driven a battering ram through its gates. She heard footsteps behind her, soft, deliberate. "You are not going to leap off the balustrade, are you?" he asked. "Because if you are, I feel obliged to mention that it is only 12 feet to the hydrangeas. You would survive, and the ensuing scandal would be tedious for everyone." Margaret closed her eyes. Even now, even after everything, his dry humour made her want to smile. She hated him for that. "What do you want, my lord?" She did not turn around. "To apologize," he said simply. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You are 4 years too late. The door for apologies closed when I read of your engagement to Lady Caroline Finch in the Morning Post." A long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I never married Lady Caroline." Margaret turned then, slowly. He had removed his mask, and she saw his face fully for the first time since that terrible morning in her father's study. He was thinner than she remembered. Lines had carved themselves around his eyes that were still that startling shade of hazel, green and gold, like a forest after rain. His dark hair was streaked with grey at the temples. He looked tired. He looked old. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "The engagement was a lie," he continued. "A fabrication planted by my father to force your father to withdraw his consent to our match. When I discovered it, I came to you at once. But you had already left London. Your mother refused to see me. Your father threatened to call me out." Margaret's hands trembled at her sides. She remembered that morning. Her father's grim face, the newspaper crumpled in his fist, the headline that had shattered her world. "Lord Jonathan Pierce to wed heiress Lady Caroline Finch." She had waited for a letter, a note, a single word of denial. None came. "You could have written to me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I wrote a dozen letters. Your father returned them all unopened." Jonathan stepped closer, and she let him, fool that she was. "I came to your estate. He set the dogs on me, literally. There were dogs, Margaret. I still have a scar on my left ankle." Despite herself, her lips twitched. He always did love those wolfhounds. "They loved me less." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the fine lines at his temples, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. "I am not here to make excuses. I'm here to tell you the truth, because you deserve it, and because I have spent 4 years regretting my silence." Margaret looked away. The truth. She had told herself so many versions of the truth, that he had never loved her, that he had been a fortune hunter all along, that their engagement had been a pleasant fiction. But standing here, hearing the raw edge in his voice, the old, treacherous hope began to stir in her chest. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not a year ago? 2? "Because I was a coward," he said. "Because I convinced myself that you had moved on, that you were happier without me, that my love was a poison you were well rid of. And then I saw you tonight, standing by the pillar in that silver gown, looking like every dream I had ever buried, and I realized that cowardice is a luxury I can no longer afford." Margaret's eyes burned. She would not cry. She had not cried over him in 3 years, and she would not start now. "One dance," she said, surprising herself. "Not because I forgive you, not because I believe you, but because I am curious to see if you can still lead." Jonathan's smile was slow and uncertain, like a man learning to hope again. "I have been practicing," he said, and offered his hand. She took it. The ballroom had grown warmer, the crowd thicker. When they re-entered, a ripple of whispers followed them. Curious eyes behind masks, speculative murmurs. Margaret ignored them all. She let Jonathan lead her to the centre of the floor just as the orchestra began a new waltz. His hand settled at her waist. She placed her hand on his shoulder. The distance between them was proper, decorous, nothing more. And yet, when the music began and they moved together, it felt like coming home. He was a better dancer than she remembered. Or perhaps she was simply more attuned to him now, every nerve alive to the pressure of his fingers, the brush of his thigh against her skirts. They turned slowly, weaving between the other couples, and for a few precious moments, the world narrowed to the space between their two bodies. "You are still angry," he observed. "I am incandescent," she agreed. "Good. Anger I can work with. Indifference would have been unbearable." She met his eyes. "Why did you not fight for me, Jonathan? Truly fight. You are a lord. Your family has money. You could have defied your father." His jaw tightened. "My father held my brother's debts over my head. He threatened to see Edmund imprisoned for gambling if I did not break the engagement. I chose the lesser evil, or so I told myself. I have since learned that there is no lesser evil when it comes to breaking the heart of the woman you love." Margaret stumbled. He caught her smoothly, pulling her closer than propriety allowed. Their faces were inches apart. She could see the pulse beating in his throat. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I know." His voice cracked. "I know, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it, whether you forgive me or not." The music swelled. The other dancers blurred into a kaleidoscope of colour. Margaret thought of the girl she had been 4 years ago, so certain of her future, so trusting. That girl had died on the day she read that newspaper. But perhaps, she thought, perhaps that girl had been reborn tonight, older and wiser and more cautious, but not entirely gone. "One dance," she said again, as much to herself as to him. "That is all I am promising." He nodded, his eyes bright. "One dance is more than I deserve." When the music ended, she stepped back. Her hand lingered on his for a moment longer than necessary. Then she curtsied, turned, and walked away, not in flight, but in retreat. She needed time, she needed to think, and she needed to remember that trust, once broken, could not be mended with a single waltz. Behind her, Jonathan watched her go. He did not follow, but he smiled, a small, fragile thing, because for the first time in 4 years, he had hope. Chapter 2. The Weight of Pride. 3 days passed before Margaret saw Jonathan again. 3 days of avoiding his calls, burning his letters unread, 2 of them, and enduring Cecilia's relentless questioning. Her younger sister had become a spy of formidable cunning, appearing in doorways at inopportune moments and dropping Jonathan's name into conversation with the subtlety of a falling chandelier. "He is staying at Pierce House," Cecilia announced at breakfast on the 4th morning. "His father died last spring, did you know? Lord Jonathan is now the Earl, and he is not married, not even a hint of a mistress, according to Lady Westbrook, who knows everything." Margaret buttered her toast with aggressive precision. "I do not care about his marital status or his lack of mistresses. You danced with him. People dance with all sorts of people at masquerades. I danced with Lord Pemberton immediately afterward, and he stepped on my foot 3 times. Cecilia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "You did not dance with Lord Pemberton. You went straight to the carriage and refused to speak for the entire journey home." Margaret set down her knife. "Cecilia, I love you. But if you mention Lord Jonathan Pierce one more time, I will tell Mama about the footman you kissed behind the stables last Michaelmas." Her sister's face went pale, then red. "You would not. Try me." The subject was dropped, for now. But Margaret knew it would not stay buried. London was a small world, and secrets had a way of surfacing like corpses in a shallow grave. That afternoon, she went walking in Hyde Park. It was a calculated risk. The fashionable hour was still an hour away, and she hoped to find the paths nearly empty. She needed air, she needed space, she needed to stop seeing Jonathan's face every time she closed her eyes. She found none of these things. He was waiting for her on the path near the Serpentine, dressed in a dark blue coat and buff breeches, his hat in his hand. He looked like a man who had been standing in the same spot for a very long time. "You are stalking me," Margaret said, stopping a few yards away. "I prefer to think of it as persistent courtship," he replied. "May I walk with you?" "No." "I will walk behind you then, at a respectful distance, like a very well-dressed shadow." Margaret resumed walking, and true to his word, Jonathan fell into step several paces behind her. They proceeded in silence for nearly a quarter mile, the only sounds the crunch of gravel and the distant calls of waterfowl. It was absurd, it was infuriating. It was also, she hated to admit, rather endearing. "You are still following me," she said without turning around. "I am. My stamina is remarkable." She stopped abruptly and faced him. "What do you want from me, Jonathan? Truly? Because I cannot give you what you want. I cannot trust you. I cannot love you. That woman died 4 years ago, and I am what remains." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and brutal. Jonathan's face did not change, but something in his eyes dimmed, a light she had not noticed until it began to fade. "I want nothing from you," he said quietly. "I want to give. I want to prove to you, not through words, not through promises, but through actions, that I am worthy of a second chance. If that takes a week, I will give you a week. If it takes a year, I will give you a year. If it takes the rest of my life, I will give you that too." Margaret's throat tightened. "You speak very prettily for a man who once let his father dictate his future." The blow landed. She saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his jaw clenched. But he did not look away. "I was 24 years old," he said. "My father had spent my entire life teaching me that duty came before desire, that a lord's first responsibility was to his family's name and fortune. When he threatened Edmund, my brother, my only sibling who was barely 19 and drowning in debt, I believed I had no choice. I was wrong. I have spent every day since knowing I was wrong. But I cannot go back and change it. I can only go forward and be better." Margaret wanted to argue. She wanted to point out that good intentions did not mend broken hearts, that regret was not the same as restitution. But the words would not come. Because beneath her anger, beneath her pride, there was something else, a small, stubborn hope that refused to die, no matter how many times she tried to smother it. "You may walk beside me," she said at last, "but do not touch me. Do not speak of love. And if you mention the past, I will leave you standing here like the fool you are." Jonathan nodded, falling into step at her side. He kept his hands clasped behind his back, a careful distance between their arms. They walked in silence for a long while, past the grazing deer and the families picnicking on the grass, past the old oak tree where they had once carved their initials on a lazy summer afternoon. Margaret saw the initials. She did not mention them, but she noticed that someone had carved a heart around them sometime in the last 4 years, and she wondered who. The days that followed were strange and tender. Jonathan did not press his suit. He did not declare his love or beg for forgiveness. Instead, he appeared at her mother's townhouse each morning with a single flower, a camellia, a rose, a sprig of lavender, and left it on the step without knocking. He sent no notes, he made no demands. He simply left the flowers, and Margaret collected them, and they both pretended she did not. He was present at every social event she attended, but he did not seek her out. He danced with other women. He laughed with other men. He stood across crowded rooms and met her eyes, and in that brief, wordless gaze, he said everything he could not yet speak aloud. "I am here. I am waiting. I am not leaving." On the 6th day, Margaret's mother, Lady Ellis, cornered her in the morning room. The Dowager Viscountess was a practical woman with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue, and she had not survived 20 years of widowhood by being sentimental. "Jonathan Pierce has been leaving flowers on our doorstep for nearly a week," she said without preamble. The servants are talking. The neighbours are noticing. What, precisely, is happening? Nothing is happening, Margaret said, arranging a vase of camellias with studied nonchalance. That is not nothing. Lady Ellis gestured at the vase. That is an apology. An awkward, prolonged, flower-based apology. Are you going to accept it? Margaret turned to face her mother. You were the one who told me he was a fortune hunter. You were the one who forbade me to see him. You burned his letters and set the dogs on him. I did, Lady Ellis agreed calmly. I was protecting you. You were 20 years old, you were in love, and you could not see that his father was the true villain in that piece. I saw it. I saw that Lord Pierce would destroy you both if given the chance, and I chose to cut the wound before it could fester. But the old lord is dead now, and Jonathan is his own man. She paused, her eyes softening. The question is not whether I forgive him, Margaret. The question is whether you can. Margaret stared at her mother, this woman who had always been her anchor, her compass, her fiercest defender. And for the first time she wondered if her mother's protection had been a cage as much as a shelter. I do not know, she admitted. I want to, but every time I look at him I remember the pain. I remember how small I felt, how discarded. That is pride, Lady Ellis said gently. Pride is a good servant, but a terrible master. Do not let it keep you from happiness. Margaret had no answer to that. She spent the rest of the day in her room, turning her mother's words over in her mind like stones in a stream. Pride. Was that what this was? Or was it self-preservation? And was there truly a difference? That evening, she made a decision. Chapter 3. The Reckoning. The invitation arrived at Pierce House at 10:30 in the morning. It was written in Margaret's own hand on cream-coloured paper sealed with plain wax. There were no flourishes, no endearments, no hint of warmth. Just 4 words, come to the gardens, today. Jonathan arrived at 3 o'clock, exactly as specified. He found Margaret waiting for him in the walled garden behind her mother's townhouse, a small, secret place filled with climbing roses and overgrown box hedges. She was not wearing a gown of silk or satin. She wore a simple day dress of sprigged muslin, her hair pulled back from her face, no jewellery save the pearl brooch that had belonged to her grandmother. She looked, he thought, more beautiful than she had ever looked at any ball. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for asking." He stopped a few feet away, his hands at his sides. "I did not know if you would." "Neither did I." She gestured to a stone bench beneath the old apple tree. "Sit, please." They sat. The bench was narrow, forcing them closer than was comfortable. Jonathan could smell her perfume, something floral and faintly sweet, like honeysuckle in the rain. "I have been thinking," Margaret began, "about what you said, about your father, about your brother, about the choices you made and the choices you did not make, and I have realized that I have been so focused on my own pain that I never considered yours." Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I am not forgiving you, not yet. But I am acknowledging that the world is more complicated than I wanted to believe. You hurt me. That is a fact. But you were also hurt. Your father manipulated you, threatened you, used the people you loved as weapons against you. And I cannot condemn you for making the wrong choice when I have never been tested in that way myself." She turned to face him fully. Her grey eyes were clear and steady, though he could see the effort it cost her to keep them that way. "I want to know everything," she said, "not the polished version, not the version you tell yourself to sleep at night. I want to know what happened in those 4 years. I want to know why you did not come back sooner, and I want you to be honest with me, even if it makes you look ugly." Jonathan drew a slow, shaky breath. You are asking for my confession. I am. He nodded, and then he began. He told her about the months following the broken engagement, the suffocating guilt, the sleepless nights, the way he would see her face in every crowd and feel his chest crack open anew. He told her about his father's triumph, the old man's smug satisfaction at having saved his son from a love match. He told her about his brother Edmund, who had died of a fever 2 years ago, leaving Jonathan alone with nothing but his title and his regrets. I came to London last year, he said, his voice rough. I told myself it was for the season, for the politics, for anything but you. But every morning I woke up and thought, she is here, she is somewhere in this city, and I could not bring myself to seek you out because I was afraid you would hate me, afraid you would have forgotten me entirely, afraid I would see you happy with someone else and realize that I had lost you forever. Margaret listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold. She held them between both of hers, warming them. I was not happy, she said softly. I told myself I was. I told everyone I was. I attended parties and laughed at jokes and pretended that my heart had not been scooped out with a rusty spoon. But I was lying. I was so lonely, Jonathan, and so angry, and so tired of being angry. She looked down at their joined hands. I do not forgive you. I am not sure I know how, but I am willing to try, and I think that is the best I can offer you right now. Jonathan lifted their hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. His eyes were wet. It is more than I deserve. Stop saying that, she said, but there was no heat in it. You cannot build a future on a foundation of self-loathing. If we are to truly try, you must believe that you are worthy of being loved. Otherwise, we will fail before we begin. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in 4 years, he allowed himself to believe that redemption might be possible. I will try, he said. For you, for us, for the man I want to become. Margaret nodded, and they sat together in the garden as the afternoon light faded into dusk, 2 wounded people learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to heal. Chapter 4. The Second Waltz. Autumn arrived in London with cool rains and turning leaves, and with it came the announcement that had been whispered about for weeks. Lord Jonathan Pierce and Lady Margaret Ellis were to be married. The banns were read at St. George's Church, the invitations were sent, and on a crisp October morning, Margaret stood before her mirror in a gown of ivory silk, her mother's pearls at her throat, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. You are trembling, Cecilia said from the doorway. She was to be Margaret's maid of honour, and she was already crying. I am not trembling. I am vibrating with anticipation. There is a difference. Cecilia laughed and threw her arms around her sister. I am so happy for you. I know it has been difficult. But he loves you. Anyone can see it. Margaret hugged her back, then gently disentangled herself. I know. That is what frightens me. Loving him again has been like learning to walk on a leg that was broken. Every step is tentative. Every step could give way, but every step that holds feels like a miracle. That is the most romantic thing you have ever said, Cecilia declared. I am going to put it in my diary. The ceremony was small by London standards, only 100 guests, mostly family and close friends. Lady Ellis sat in the front pew, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Lord Pemberton was notably absent, having sent his regrets and a snuff-box. Margaret donated it to a charity auction. And at the altar, waiting with his hands clasped behind his back, stood Jonathan. He looked different than he had on that first night at the masquerade. The lines on his face had softened. The shadows beneath his eyes had faded. When he saw Margaret walking toward him on her mother's arm, his breath caught audibly, and she saw him mouth 2 words. Thank you. She did not know if he was thanking God or fate, or simply the universe for granting him this second chance. But she smiled, a real smile, the kind she had forgotten she possessed, and she walked toward him without hesitation. The vows were traditional, but the weight behind them was new. When the clergyman asked if she took this man to be her wedded husband, Margaret looked into Jonathan's eyes and saw the truth. Not the polished version, not the version she had constructed in her grief, but the raw, imperfect, beautiful truth of two people who had chosen each other against all odds. "I do," she said. And Jonathan, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks, said the same. The wedding breakfast was held at Ashworth House, the same ballroom where they had met again, where they had waltzed for the first time in 4 years. The chandeliers still glittered, the candles still danced, but everything else had changed. Margaret stood by the window, watching the rain fall on the garden below. A moment later, Jonathan appeared at her side. "You are supposed to be cutting the cake," she said. "The cake can wait." He took her hand. "I wanted to ask you something." "You have already asked me to marry you. I said yes. The paperwork is signed." He smiled, that slow, uncertain smile that she had come to love. "Not that. I wanted to ask if you would dance with me." The orchestra was playing a waltz. The other guests were beginning to notice them, smiles spreading across familiar faces. Cecilia was already dragging their mother toward the floor. Margaret looked at Jonathan, her husband, her second chance, her redemption, and felt the last shards of her old hurt dissolve like frost in morning sun. "I thought you would never ask," she said. He led her to the center of the floor, just as he had done 4 months ago. His hand settled at her waist. Her hand found his shoulder. The distance between them was nothing now, nothing at all. They danced, and as they turned beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by the people they loved, Margaret realized that forgiveness was not a single act, but 1,000 small ones. It was the flowers left on the step, the walks in the park, the garden confession, the wedding vows, and now this waltz, this moment, this man who had broken her heart and then spent 4 years learning how to mend it. "I love you," Jonathan whispered against her hair. "I know," she whispered back. And then, because the truth demanded to be spoken, she added, "I love you too." The music swelled. The rain fell. And in the glittering ballroom of Ashworth House, 2 people who had once lost everything found something infinitely precious. A second chance, earned not through grand gestures, but through the quiet, relentless work of choosing each other, day after day, until the choosing became effortless. They waltzed until the candles burned low and the guests began to depart. And when the last note faded and the ballroom fell silent, Jonathan took Margaret's hand and led her out into the rain, not toward a carriage, but toward the garden, toward the future, toward the rest of their lives. Behind them, the ballroom stood empty and waiting, its chandeliers dark, its floors scuffed by 1,000 dancing feet. But it would be filled again. There would be other seasons, other waltzes, other stories beginning and ending beneath its gilded ceiling. For now, though, it was enough to know that some stories, the best ones, deserved a second beginning. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little